controls can be as simple as the, same switch you see in our logo, an on-off switch, to as complex multi-building wide network-driven systems. The reasons for more lighting controls include, more regulations and codes requiring more precise energy management, reaping the benefits of varying lighting levels and color temps, and finally, customer employee experience design. Well, welcome to Keeping the Lights On. I'm your host, Todd Reed, and on this podcast, I connect with the owners and pros who design, build, and maintain our electrical, communications, and industrial world to explore the best ways forward. To teach us to stop worrying and learn to love lighting controls, I brought in Steve Rowe, Vice President of Controls at Acuity, as our guest today. Steve has held various roles at Acuity and is experienced in product design and development, project layout, design, installation, programming, and service support of lighting control devices and networks. Steve's passion is lighting controls, and he loves to demystify the complexity of these devices and networks. Outside of his work, he loves to spend time with his wife and two children, and enjoys home projects and traveling. You can also find Steve on YouTube in his video series, Rowe on Controls. These short videos are designed to share ideas and concepts in lighting controls. The link to that playlist is in the show notes in your favorite podcast player or on our YouTube channel. Well, let's get into the show. So we like to start out each episode, because we're trying to bring people from different groups together and understand each other, and you can really do that well over a meal. So I like to start out each episode with the meals that bring us together. So, Steve, if I or maybe a customer or someone were to visit you, where might you take us, and why would you choose this place?
Todd, what a great question. So live in Atlanta, of course, and I live very close to downtown Decatur. So most are familiar with that space if they visited Atlanta. And there's a place I love to go to called the Brick Store Pub. So been there as long as I've been here, 2016. I think it's actually been there for 20, 30 years. And I think their claim to fame is one of those telephone book style beer lists. So they even have a Belgian beer bar. And if you know the right folks, I once had a meal there where we got introduced to the owners, and we ended up in their beer bar basement. So they have this old basement, which used to be a bank, and it has the old bank vault door, which is really cool. But so they have that strong beer list, also great food. So if you come to town, and Todd, I hope you do one day, we'll find ourselves probably at the Brick Store Pub in downtown Decatur.
Okay. What is your what's your favorite beer and food combo, whichever direction you want to take?
They have a not an extensive menu, but it's very curated. I love it. They do like a short rib pot roast that's really good, or also a chicken pot pie, which, if you can imagine that being a delicious meal there. And then on the beer side, I feel like the beer list is so extensive that you just try to go with what they have as a rotational. The last time I was there, I want to say I went back a ways and had a Delirium Tremens. I don't know if you've had that before, but what a great beer that they have, and they have that all the time. And then otherwise, work on the rotational of what they have on draft that day.
Well, we had a place here, I think it's still here, but in the Clayton area in St. Louis that had made incredible chicken pot pies.
Yeah.
If I could find a good one, I'll do that. So that's gonna be my first thing I get there. Hey, so I was researching them because, you and I talked previously, and I just kind of looking up a little bit about that restaurant. First of all, it sounds really cool. It sounds like they really care, especially about the beer side of things. And so correct me if I'm wrong here. It sounds like what I like to do is I like to try to tie in that restaurant with our topic. Sometimes might be a little bit of a stretch, which this one might be. But it sounds like they don't have any like major domestic brands that they sell there. They don't have like a lot of TVs or any TVs, no loud music. It sounds like it's a very different, it's more of a pub style from maybe like you might see in England or in Europe, I guess, generally, Belgium.
Yes, correct. Yeah.
So it just made me think about, so they've chosen kind of a little bit of a simplified route in that they're not making it a crazy, experience as far as electronics are concerned, but they also do complicate their life a little bit with, curating this beer list that sounds incredible, like you said, phone book style. So there's a little bit of simplicity there and a little bit of complexity there, and it kind of got me thinking about lighting controls, because you can have an on-off switch, like I mentioned in our intro, like, our logo, or you can have a complete campus-wide networked, software-driven, very complex system. So, um, and I know from just being in this business and the distributor side, and my wife's a lighting designer, and hearing from her side, and talking to a lot of contractors, controls can just be just crazy. Like it can be a thing that's very frustrating, and on the lighting side of things. So let's start to, but it doesn't have to be, and that's why you're
Mhm.
here.
Yeah.
So let's start by understanding the problem. So how is the fear of controls different for each of those stakeholders, and considering the vast solutions and complexity and technology involved.
Yeah, and that's a great question, and I love the comparison there. Our job often is to make it simple, right? We want to make it simple, and how we simplify it, and that's really the special opportunity here. And so I think the problem, if you try to frame is some of the complexities and challenges, is look at the personas and understand it from those personas is really the important piece. And like I can imagine from the installation side, an electrical contractor, and they're tasked with obviously installing all the products correctly and making sure they're functional. And there is a wide variety of products and potentially, learning curves depending on the solutions, especially as you get into these networked lighting controls. So understanding the solutions, making sure they're installed properly, especially if they are different architectures, different solutions, different wiring even. So understanding that, that complexity, making sure you even said it, making sure that you have the right lighting controls for the right lights and lighting loads, right? That's an important one too, because, there are standards out there to drive compatibility, but phase dimming and 0 to 10 don't work together, right?
Hmm.
That's by design, of course. But if you get a phase dimmer and you have 0 to 10 volt dimmable lights, those will not obviously function. So you got to know that you're marrying the right controls with the right lights. And that's all on that installation, but that also carries a little bit over to the service and facilities management side, because if they have different solutions, they need to know how to service and update those solutions, and also how to troubleshoot them if something doesn't work appropriately. So understanding how to utilize those solutions can be one of those challenges, and understanding from that perspective and that persona. And then even if you look at maybe an owner, or even the occupant, those utilizing the space, are they maximizing the value of those controls? And a lot of times they're installed for energy code compliance or other reasons, but then there's all these other benefits and values that aren't being realized. And that's maybe part of what I would say is the problem too, is understanding all those values and benefits beyond just that initial energy code compliant energy savings. And so understanding how to utilize them properly, and making sure they're maximizing the value. Those are some of the problems that maybe I would see there with the lighting controls.
Well, I mean, certainly on that, as a data, basically, I would put myself as the day-to-day user in that list that you did, right? Because that's what I do. And yeah, there's times that an occupancy sensor makes the lights go out, so I'm not keeping the lights on; they're just going out. I'm sitting there waving my arms. So and we, or you walk into a new room. We've had some new rooms put in where I work, and sometimes they might be a little bit more complex. You're like, okay, now what do I need to do? And sometimes it's a little bit more intuitive, and sometimes it's a little bit of you got to think about it. And maybe it's because I'm old, but anyway, what are some of the other challenges that come in and start to complicate the controls decision?
Yeah, it's great because you think about what are all those influences, and you got to think energy codes. And why that's a challenge is because energy codes can be fairly sophisticated and complex. And I know because like I've spent a lot of time understanding those, even at times interpreting them. Because they're not always prescriptive in nature, such that it says this is the solution thou shalt use there. Where you've got to interpret exactly what to apply. So energy codes, can add that level of complexity there. Other challenges, you just mentioned one, the perception too. If you've had that experience of lighting controls where you're in a space, if you're in a big space by yourself, maybe after hours or early in the morning, and the lights turn off on you because you don't have that full coverage of occupancy, it's like that perception. Because I think most people, when they think of lighting controls, that's exactly what they think about. right? They're going to think of that time or that challenge, and really the perception then becomes it's all about energy savings. And I always want to be careful that everyone recognizes that it's not just about energy savings, right? So that one challenge you described, can become the perception, and that's so important for us to recognize so we can describe the additional value. And just so funny that keeping the lights on, I was just joking a little bit earlier. It's funny for me because my whole role is to turn those lights off or provide the right light levels when the person's in the space. And so the perception that we want to get there is the best controls are the ones that you don't know are there, right? Because they're just doing exactly what they should be doing for you, for the space occupant. And so just some of that becomes the challenge. And then maybe one more I'm thinking of is just on the facilities management side as well. Talked a little bit about this earlier in that kind of troubleshooting, understanding, especially if you run a campus or multiple facilities, how do you service all those and how do they work together instead of they're just kind of disparate, spread out systems? So just other challenges that you encounter in the space where you do have different systems, different technologies, whether it be standalone lighting controls, room level, or, these full blown networks, wired and wireless, right? So all those technologies exist in this space, and how are they complementary and some can perceive that as a challenge because they just see the complexities of all the different solutions, although there is a lot of commonality throughout them.
Okay. So there's probably I think there's some in our conversations and just kind of reading up on this topic, there seem to be some trends in the short term and maybe long term if you want to cover that as well, but that might be pushing a broader adoption of lighting controls. It seems like it might be that might require our listeners to work past the challenges. It may not be just an option, like, to put it in, it might be a little bit more required. So
Yeah.
what are some of those trends? I think you've got quite a few actually that I got on there.
Yeah, there are a lot of trends. I've mentioned this a couple of times already, but just to kind of dive in a little deeper on it, energy codes, right? Energy codes, they get more sophisticated because the goal a lot of times, again, is to drive that additional energy savings. And so as you look and maybe specifically look at Title 24 for a second, a lot of the energy code there, very sophisticated, multiple daylight halving zones, requires dimming in all these space types. It's not only even just interior, you see that in exterior spaces. And even some of the code compliance in Title 24 in California now requires demand response for under 4,000 watts. So you think about that, it's not a very large space. And so, but demand response or automated demand response requires a network system because you have to be able to communicate from a demand response server, from a utility, to those lights and lighting controls in the space. So it requires networking all of those. So that's just a common maybe trend that's going to drive towards the networked lighting control solutions. And you may see that kind of cascade across the country, more sophisticated solutions such as that. Because you got to think trends, mega trends are obviously sustainability, what we see there in sustainability and our demand for electricity. And then I'd say one more, that we continue to see is that luminaire level lighting control. You'll see it, the triple LC, it's common in energy code and common across the industry, where we start to build the smarts into the luminaire so that luminaire is like a controls enabled luminaire. It's got embedded controls in it. And it can be an intelligent luminaire because it really simplifies some of the challenges we talk about, where that compatibility challenge of does my control work with my light, that's solved because when you get luminaire level, it's wired and tested at the manufacturer and shipped that way. And also you can kind of drive your increased energy savings from that. So luminaire level lighting controls where you get granularity of control, where I can actually now tune individual fixtures, get information from individual fixtures. So just another trend that we continue to see that continues to push and drive lighting controls in the space.
Interesting. So I think you kind of covered it there by the luminaires actually learning, but can you kind of spend a little time more on that? Because I'm not really familiar with that.
The luminaire level lighting control. Yeah. Mm-hmm. So it's, you think nowadays, a lot of the controls, it's just like external controls used to be relay panels or power packs, room level controls, and they communicate just analog. They'll like interrupt relays, communicate 0 to 10 to fixtures. That's kind of how lighting controls used to be delivered. But now moving to intelligent luminaires, you can actually create little data buses, and information can be shared between a control device and a driver. An LED driver, for example. And now all of a sudden you can get information and data from these devices because that information is being shared. And if you have information from a driver, you can carry it maybe across a control network. So this intelligent luminaire becomes really interesting because it also maybe advances the solution beyond what traditionally lighting controls were there to do, which is just turn the lights on and off and dim them. Right now you're talking about intelligent luminaires where I can accomplish that very same thing, of course, right? Because at the core, we're trying to control that light, provide the right, level for the task. And when people are in the space, but now I now have a digital network inside that fixture. So I have an intelligent light that I can now bring data from and do a little bit more than I have been able to do historically.
Why is it important that we get better controls installed in our buildings?
Yep, energy savings, of course. Don't need to hammer on that point. But that's like the immediate value in what Energy Code is driving. But all the other values, and I do want to say sustainability long term, that is really important. And at the core, we need to continue to drive that. But it's also, there's just so many other values that people need to recognize. And I really want people to understand around lighting controls. And it's even now, think of the space occupant and think of the software developer that sits in front of a number of computer screens all day. Do they need the same level of lights than maybe someone doing manufacturing or assembly operations, or folks that are doing, there's just so many different, like I sit behind a laptop often, but my task lighting needs to be different than the software developer's task lighting, than the manufacturing assembly person's task lighting. And so that is a big opportunity for lighting controls, is how can we use the light and put the right amount of light for the task at hand. And really it drives efficiency and comfort, and people really can appreciate that. So just understanding the task and giving the right level to the task is just a huge opportunity to drive productivity and make people feel more comfortable in what they're doing. Even the automation aspect, I said this earlier and I want to reiterate, it's like the best lighting controls are those that are just operating and you don't necessarily know they're there, right? And because think of daylight harvesting in a space where I have all this sunlight contribution coming into the building. I don't need all of the electric light. And so, dimming that down, even turning it off at times, you see it in the outdoor space, of course, but in indoors near windows, like you don't want people to necessarily recognize it. They've got the right task light level on their work surface, but we are saving energy. And so those controls that are operating autonomously are really important. And it does save a little bit of time. Think of walking into a space and your lights turn on automatically. It's that person not having to walk over and use the lighting controls, mess with the lighting controls. That actually very helpful to just drive productivity. Of course, there's a safety aspect to this. Walking into a parking garage, maybe it's dimmed down to save energy savings because there's nobody there for 90% of the time, but they walk into the garage, the lights are at a dim level, they all come up uniformly, creating a safe environment. That's important, right? That's a network control solution where all of a sudden everything can respond and bring it up to that right level to make people feel safe. And then I have one more that I think is really important, is as we try to invite people back to the work environment and back into more commercial facilities, lighting controls and even other technologies that are inviting people and make them feel comfortable and give them, that capability, that comfort, even in the conference room where they can, have the capability of adjusting the lights to really support the environment, what they're trying to do. So technologies like that are really important to invite people back and make them feel welcome. Or even some of our facilities that we have, having some of those, not decorative, but like nice, visibly pleasing, makes the environment feel special. And I think that's really important. And lighting controls can really help with that, even beyond that energy savings. You think of color lights in lobbies and facade areas that can be inviting and show corporate colors or school colors, or just give nice effects during the holidays, make a more warm and inviting environment. You can often do that with those same control systems through DMX lighting and things like that. So A lot of really great benefits and reasons why we need to continue to push this. There's not a one size fits every person there in those spaces. People do like differences. I've seen people who sit in the dark and they like that versus others who like places extremely lit. And so having that granularity of control is important.
Anyway, there's research on the value of color temperature, lighting levels, and all that, and their effects on the human mind and body. So I don't know, how much of that is being put in and thought about it from a manufacturing perspective. But being in business I'm in, I hear about it occasionally. And so
yeah, there's a lot of technology there, and we could spend an entire podcast deep diving even all of that technology and capability and where it's going. But I will say, to even offer a comment there, the common application for tunable, like where you can actually adjust the Kelvin temperature of the luminaires, is think of a classroom where I remember even when I was in like grade school, like the lights were so important because they were how you got impact with the kids, like of hey, it's going to be recess or lunchtime, and I remember like in maybe fourth or fifth grade, the teacher would turn the lights on and off to kind of signal that, or you remember just like the school classrooms where often teachers will bring in lights to change the environment and make it more inviting, like especially if you have high color temperature, things like that. So just understanding that if you have that next level of control beyond just dimmability, you can control the color temperature to bring, maybe from a 2700 Kelvin more warm to a, 5000 Kelvin, a little bit more blue or bright, that's another kind of level of control in a classroom. Like, and I think that's like a really like great application where giving maybe a couple preset scenes to drive behaviors. So back from recess and the kids are lunch and the kids start to heads start to bob a little bit, and so like you could start to maybe try to energize folks. So things like that are really interesting uses of technology beyond just your traditional on, off, and dimming. A lot more, I'm sure, to come there as we continue to invest as an industry and look at the technologies and the capabilities. But that's just maybe a more common application.
So, Steve, I want you to you've kind of laid out the foundation for the topic, but I'd like you to start thinking about the future, and I want you to imagine a world where lighting controls are as ubiquitous as the common on off switch, like behind me. What does the world or industry look like to you?
Gosh, what a great world to be in, Todd, right? That's the world and why we want to continue to drive it, because that's the goal, is to make everyone understand the value, and also as a manufacturer to make it simple enough that we can drive that ubiquitous nature of it. Of course, we're back to we're continuing to drive energy savings. I think that's really important. Of that ubiquity is going to drive really intelligent buildings and really reduce the lighting load as much as possible on the grid. That's great. I think we're going to see more software in that space. So if you drive to that, you're going to see as much as lighting controls, people still feel are like the set it and forget it nature. Like I install it and it does what it does. Some of these networks they're living and breathing. That's the reality of some of these lighting control networks as you kind of build them up, and they have capabilities where if you can interact with them with software and we can make it simple enough for users. Todd, what you described earlier is I want my light, I'm okay with it being a little dim because there's sunlight, but my neighbor doesn't. Like those are realities, right? We start to think about use of software to drive a little bit more sophistication and adaptation of the system and solution in the space. So I think that idea of the living, breathing solution is going to drive a little bit more software. So as we really drive these networks into the space, it's going to drive, I'd say, facilities managers and sustainability managers to make better use of the system and to adapt it to the space. Because also, worth noting, space types change, right? As commercial facilities, the needs change. We're going to put up walls, take down walls, make bigger rooms, smaller rooms. Same in other environments in schools and classrooms. Like the spaces do change. Like one day this room may be used for science, the next day it's used for social studies, and maybe that's a different need. Lab environments, things of that nature. So as we drive that, I can almost imagine a world where these systems become more regularly managed in front of the user more commonly, not just I use the switch on the wall when I think I need it. And it's actually something that people interact with more regularly to drive a better outcome for themselves. So more software, and then back to the more intelligent luminaires. Again, that technology, we can continue to put the technology in and the smarts into the light, where I have an intelligent driver and I have intelligent controls and light engines, and all of that can be an intelligent system that can provide us information. And where that goes, again, we could spend a lot of time there, but information and data is another piece where I see just you're going to start to get more of that if and when we continue to see more and more of this in the market. I know the runtime of every fixture. I know, I know how often it's occupied, right? You think of that data and that information you can get from these intelligent devices, that really starts to drive an opportunity to make great use of the data. So a lot to unpack there, Todd, but I think that's some of the future there.
Yeah, start to get there for that future that you envision. Like, what are some steps that we can start going, and our listeners can start thinking about and to get there?
Yeah, that's really, I think the crux of all this, Todd, is how do we drive it there? And I think that's a collective question. I honestly do. Because it takes so much collaboration. As you know full well, and I'm sure our listeners, like the lighting industry has some complexities of how these solutions are brought to market. And so making sure that everyone understands the value, I think is really important. And so what that requires is collaboration between lighting designers and distributors, such as Graybar, and manufacturers such as Acuity Brands. We need that collaboration and all of the stakeholders there too. I mean, all the electrical contractors, of course, and even end users, facilities managers. We all need to recognize the value and tell the value so that we can all collectively really drive that critical mass. So we need to make sure we understand that value. And one of those ways is to, make sure it remains simple. I do really think that's important, is value and complexity, doesn't often scream simplicity. But again, that's where we need to make sure people understand it. It's easy to install, easy to operate. Because even all the home apps that you're describing, most of them, like they don't need to come in and train you on how to utilize that app. You can figure it out after a period of time. And there's always something new you find when you're in there. You're like, I didn't know it did that. There's all these complexities, of course, but at a user level, it's just very simple. And so continuing to drive simplicity for all those stakeholders. And simple is different for different aspects. Like the electrical contractor is a different idea of what simple is than an end user in the space and a space occupant, right? So their simplicity is going to be different, and we need to make sure we address all of those. And then I don't want people to be scared. I don't like complexity is not always mean that it's nothing, like people have a barrier, need a PhD to understand it. That's not ever what I'm trying to say, because I always try to kind of simplify it for myself of lighting controls in these networks. We have networks that are tens of thousands of devices and endpoints, but that's not it. That's not where it actually starts. It starts at 2 devices in a classroom, right? You think of it that way. It's like you've got a campus of 40 buildings or 50 buildings, and they all have network lighting controls. But that's okay. That's what we want. We want to drive that. But think about the classroom is where it begins, where I've got a wall station and maybe intelligent luminaires, and that's it. That's what creates this network. And then you just stamp, rinse, repeat by application type. And then I've got a parking garage, and I've got maybe some roadway lights, all these things. And they're just kind of accumulating in a network for that added value. So just don't want people to always think about all those tens of thousands of devices and thinking of the scariness of that, because that's not. It's really, I have all these just little micro networks that operate, and then you can accumulate them for added value. If I want to put software and I want to manage it all remotely and I want to do integrations, those kinds of things, that's where you add value. But again, it's not sophisticated in nature or complex in nature.
Right. So you mentioned, it's funny, I was laughing because software is becoming more important than controls. You've kind of touched on it a few times here. Yeah. And designing that lighting for that room that I was telling you about, the TV room, I set up a routine and I cannot get it to work, and I'm not sure why. So, that's something there, but can you, and that's not a very important thing. It's not a life critical.
Invite me to Todd. I'll help you figure out why at some point.
Yeah.
All right.
I'll reach out to you afterwards. So can you touch on how manufacturers are collaborating and working toward making software, part of lighting better for the end users, contractors, and all that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I would say, there's a number of ways to achieve that. Of course, with like focus groups and input, and I think that's really where it lives. Like I know as we develop software, one of the key pieces is getting it in front, like doing user testing and usability studies, and which are fairly common in software. It's like have folks utilize it and see how they utilize it, and don't lead the witness, right? You don't have to ask all the questions of like wouldn't it be great if? No, 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 no. You can put it in front of someone's hands and just see how they utilize it and then drive efficiencies over time. And also getting data from those usage. A lot of like applications, for example, we can get usage information of like how it's utilized. So then that way you can optimize workflows where it's like if somebody is hitting a button every single time, that is an opportunity, right? To make something simpler. And so I would say it's all about usability testing and getting it in front of folks. And then there is some level of commonalities between systems as well that becomes important. Like when you get in a vehicle and you go to use the HVAC, there's a common nature between HVAC and every vehicle. And that's by design, right? So that you can get into a car and they're more and more sophisticated themselves these days. And sometimes I'm
Mhm.
looking for a button that I can't find. But it's like, but that you can get the HVAC to work, or you can get the radio to work, and you can get, you know how the blinkers and all those things work. Driving commonalities like that are important because, because you want to drive that for mass adoption. And I know there are things like how we mark products, things of that nature, where there are some standards that really help. So that way, if you do walk into a space, you know how this works, whether it's manufacturer A, B, or C. And that's
Mm.
really important as well. So that software that can also translate to hardware, of course. But that's, I'd say, some of the ways to make sure that we do drive that critical mass adoption.
And I believe, do we is there a committee that's working towards common icon,
Yeah, there's
iconography?
like I know a NEMA committee that I participate in that does that for specifically plug load control, right? So plug load
Mm.
control is common in some energy codes, and that's a very specific one where understanding and the user understanding plug load control is so critical, right? Because plug loads that turn off when spaces become vacant, right, is important, and there's certain things you should and should not plug into that, right, to
Mm.
drive energy savings. But you don't necessarily want a server turning off, right? Or you don't want something that's, critical to the space to turn off. And that's why the space types that require plug load control are obviously understanding of the nature of that. But then all the different controlled receptacles from different manufacturers, having some commonality there really helps so that the user in the space understands what we believe to be a simple marking really is trying to indicate, like
Yeah.
this load will turn off when it's vacant, which seemingly simple, but when you think about it, if you have different markings from different manufacturers, that's going to drive a challenge. Like, wait, over
Yeah.
there I saw a green square, and here I saw a green circle. Do they mean different things, right? And that's where
Yeah.
you gotta drive that commonality.
I
Yeah,
want you to
that's
talk just briefly on row one controls, which I know you don't spend they're short, but can you maybe
Yeah.
spend just a brief little plug for what that is and what you're trying to achieve with that?
Todd, I'm so glad you bring that up. My goal to go viral, of course. So need your help there. No, it's really there is so much capability. It's really the intent and a lot of what we talked about here today. Like the goal is just to make sure people understand it, to demystify, let's say, some of the complexity, understand some of the simple nature of controls. So just trying to do it through a little fun. It's always great to have a little bit of fun and do short clips just to explain maybe a specific topic. And I try to generate the topics based on questions that I get, and things that questions that often come across and I see, and you see it a lot. And I feel like maybe in a 2-minute quick spiel, you can explain it a little bit just to give people a little understanding. So, gosh, we just, a few episodes in now, and I'm going to continue to drive that on a monthly cadence, and certainly welcome from yourself, Todd, or others, any topics you feel would benefit from that. And the goal, again, is just to really bring up the tides. Let's make sure everyone understands controls, how simple they can be, the value of them, and if there are complexities out there that people don't fully grasp, if we can distill it down to a 2-minute clip, talk about it, that's where I'd love to do it, just to help the industry, and I hope others are appreciating that. That we can drive and help bring the industry up and drive more lighting controls.
Great. Yeah, so Row on Controls, I did not mention this, is a series on YouTube on the Acuity site on page. I will link to that in the show notes, so everyone can go check those out. There's just a few episodes out there, so you can start influencing the direction that Steve goes with that, and they are short, which is nice. So Steve, let's wrap up the conversation with refocusing on the why of what you do. So what motivates you to do this day in and day out? What keeps you excited and passionate about what you do?
Gosh, what a great, I love that question because I am such a passionate person about what I do. And my wife always, when she overhears me, she's like, wow, you're talking in your passionate work voice. Cause I do have a lot of passion for this. Gotta say, I love my colleagues, of course, those I work with. My career at Acuity Brands has been tremendous. So really appreciate that. Love those that I work with day in, day out. I have a passion for the technology. I think that there's so many things we can do here. And we've talked about such a wide variety of them because it's no longer just the energy savings, simple controls in a space. We're talking about software automation. We're talking about user interfaces. We're talking about like digitally intelligent lighting fixtures, and that unlocks a world of potential. So the technology and the capabilities here are just they're so vast that I love that, and I love to understand the problems and the challenges. So I'd say those are the things that get me up every day, day in, day out. In addition, of course, to my family and my kids, and spending time with them, and them supporting me in this career and this journey. But I just stay so passionate because all those things just add in, and it's really a great spot to be in. There's a lot of support in the industry. And really great spot to be in. I love it.
Wow, sounds great. Yeah, your passion, you can hear it, and like I said, that's I love that your passionate work voice, which we appreciate here. So, hey, Steve, thank you for taking the time to be with us today and sharing that passion with us, with the listeners. It's been great to have you on the show.
Thank you, Todd. Really appreciate being here.
Well, that was my conversation with Steve Rowe, Vice President of Controls at Acuity. You can connect with Steve and what he's working on, including his YouTube series, Row on Controls, by heading to the links in the show notes. If you enjoyed this episode, you can help us grow this show by leaving a 5-star rating and subscribing in your favorite podcast player, and now on YouTube and YouTube Music. If you use the Spotify app to listen or watch us on YouTube, of course, you can always leave a comment there. You can let us know what you think of that specific topic, the show, and also what topics you want us to cover in the future. I'd love that interaction with you and to share your thoughts. So thanks for listening to this episode of Keeping the Lights On. We'll see you next time.